So just a quick introduction. My name is Cottrell, and I run our Smart Cities business for Ruckus. And for those of you, there we go, who haven't heard of Ruckus, we are one of the world's leaders in Wi-Fi. Earlier this year, we actually became part of Arris, who is our parent company, and that makes us really excited because Arris runs or leads the residential space. So if you go home tonight, look at the back of your set-top box. I guarantee that's probably manufactured by Arris. Sneaky guys there. Really exciting for us, especially when we talk about smart cities, because a lot of this innovation that we're seeing in the industry right now are in your homes, and we're taking some of that same innovation that you get to experience in the comfort of your home out into the city centers. So just a quick glimpse at our portfolio, and I promise this isn't going to be a sales pitch, but we sell Wi-Fi, and we also have a series of switches and software analytic platforms and access management. And it's a really interesting concept because I sit down with a lot of cities all over the world and they say to me, okay, just because you sell Wi-Fi, how does that make you smart? And how does that tie into a smart city? So we're gonna focus on that today, talk about why Wi-Fi is a great infrastructure for doing a lot of the applications that Dan discussed, and talk about how that will also be a key and integral part to connecting all of the places and bringing all of those concepts together when you're talking about data and processes and all of these new technology standards. It's really exciting stuff. From a smart cities perspective, we've actually been playing in this space for quite some time. But of course, we all know smart cities is just this sexy marketing term. So we didn't actually call it smart cities, but we're now hip to the game. We know that this is a great catchy phrase. We know that it's hot off the press, and it's something that we are really dedicated into focusing a lot of our resources and becoming thought leaders in this space. So I just wanted to touch on some of those projects because you've probably heard of some of them. Anyone know about Link NYC? So good, you've been doing your research. So in New York City, we took 10,000 old telephone booths and we've turned them into these great smart digital kiosks. And you go up to these kiosks and on them you have maybe emergency service call buttons, you can charge your cell phone, perhaps there's a wayfinding screen on there. And on the top of each of these kiosks is an AP. An AP, for those of you that don't know, is basically what gives off Wi-Fi. And one of my favorite anecdotes to use with this use case is that the Wi-Fi has been so good in Manhattan that now the residents in the area are canceling their Wi-Fi subscriptions because they're just connecting to what's happening on the street. And you guys are probably starting to see that here in Sheffield because recently we've worked with IDAC Networks to deploy that Sheffield infrastructure as well, and making sure that Wi-Fi is now going to be that leader for that infrastructure of choice here in Sheffield. A couple other logos you might notice, City of York, right up the street from here. Again, that is a Ruckus network. And when we're talking about smart cities, I love so much what you said. I could have paid you to say it. I go to cities big like Dubai, and yeah, smart cities, it's great. But you're absolutely right. There's places and pockets in the UK where it might not be a city. We're talking about how do you connect places, and how do you actually bring that connectivity to places of community life where there is all of these different processes happening and we're delivering services for citizens. So when we're talking about those smart places, how do you actually build that ecosystem and what does that look like? And I use this slide often when I'm meeting with cities specifically because a lot of times they don't know where they're going and they don't know what they want. Sheffield is definitely unique. You guys are ahead of the curve in terms of you have a vision, you know kind of what that benchmark looks like, but a lot of cities are just trying to solve for today. They don't have the luxury of thinking, where do I want to be in 3 years, 5 years time? But a lot of that starts with that simple conversation of what are you trying to achieve? What are those standards and policies that you're looking at? Cybersecurity is obviously a hot topic right now. We know that we need to solve for a lot of those issues. And I love right now that the government is getting behind a lot of these legislations. I mean, not just here in the UK. I know Scotland, as of last month, just launched a new $1 million fund for IoT in the region of the Highlands. Wi-Fi for EU, anyone's heard of that? It's another EU campaign where the European Commission have allocated 120 million euros to bring connectivity across Europe. So we're seeing that this has become more of a top priority. But again, when you're looking at how am I going to build this ecosystem, this is where it's going to start, this bottom layer. Applications. So of course, you can't talk about an ecosystem unless you're talking about the services that are being offered. So here in the city of Sheffield, what are you trying to deliver? What do our citizens care about? What do the tourists and the business goers care about? Are we looking at improving transportation? I'm not going to talk about smart parking, but of course that is one of the elements that does become discussed when you're looking at that larger ecosystem. Education, massive right now. I mean, e-learning is at the forefront of every educator's conversations. We're seeing technology in the classrooms, and we need connectivity available so that we can bring all of those processes together. Of course, when you're looking at that ecosystem, every city is going to be different, and you need to consider who you're trying to solve for. I mean, we hear the slogan digital divide thrown out quite a bit, but it is a very true, very serious situation. One of the biggest projects we're working on right now is with the Google stations. Has anyone heard of this? Looking at you. So a lot of the emerging countries, like you mentioned, don't have connectivity. So in places like India, where we're actually putting connectivity in the train station so people can actually go to the train station, apply for jobs, do their homework, connect with their friends on the other side of the world. We sometimes take Wi-Fi for granted. I mean, I was on the train today and I was thinking to myself, I am entitled to have connectivity my entire train route. My call shouldn't be dropped. I should be able to pay my bills. This is ridiculous. But that's not the world we live in. We're still working on that. And if we have that concept and we're here just in the UK, imagine what it's like in other parts of the world. Devices. Again, who actually walks around with just one device? I wish. My bag is so heavy. I have 2 phones. I have a laptop, usually an iPad. If you have any wearables on top of it, all of those need to be connected. But when we're talking about smart cities, it's not just our personal devices. We're also looking at what's happening on the street. What kind of street furniture and those infrastructures need to be connected? Digital signage. This is becoming more and more prevalent, especially university campuses. I talked about smart boards, wayfinding. It's a means for people to communicate, a two-way messaging opportunity here. We won't talk about smart cars here because I know it's a little way too advanced. So this is actually where we play. And when we talk about, okay, why is Wi-Fi important? It is the infrastructure to be able to deliver those applications, connect those devices, and deliver those services for multiple types of audiences. So I like to call Wi-Fi the plumbing, right? We are the plumbing to actually be able to hold up this larger ecosystem. And everything that Dan talked about from that OS management platform, it would sit on top of it, and it's kind of that glue in between, bringing all those pieces together. I wouldn't be able to talk about Wi-Fi without mentioning our solution partners. So obviously, yes, we're a Wi-Fi vendor, but I don't create cameras, I don't create sensors. So we do work with a lot of solution partners to deliver those end-to-end solutions that meet those services that we're trying to solve for and meet those applications that we're trying to deliver. Just a few examples here, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but a few use cases of where Wi-Fi is actually becoming prevalent. So we actually have created APs that can embed into a lot of these street furnitures. A great one here in the UK is the street lighting use case. So we're seeing more and more councils who have issues or agenda objectives to actually transform their existing lighting infrastructure to LED lamps. 40% energy savings there. And why not, if you're already out there transforming your lighting infrastructure, use this as an opportunity to also include Wi-Fi. So we now have APs that you can put inside those lampposts. They're very prettily hidden inside of those. So you can deliver that public access and, of course, save money on those cost savings. All right, IoT. As if smart cities wasn't your own marketing term, IoT is another one that you're going to hear more and more about. The challenge with IoT, and it is similar to smart cities, is that it's being deployed in silos. Everyone has their own opinion. There's probably, I know I can probably name off the top of my head 20 different radio standards when you're talking about IoT. And the problem is they're deploying something, they're deploying something, you guys are deploying something, but how are we actually connecting all of those? And how can we use and benefit from what IoT is actually delivering? So what Ruckus has done is what we do best. We connected these types of applications. So instead of having a disjointed services deployment and all of your assets being separated, we've created, again, that glue that actually pulls everything together. So this is for the techies in the room. It's just a nice architecture of what this could actually look like, where you're turning an AP into an IoT controller and being able to manage all of those different applications at the point of a single AP. So Dan gave a great example of when you walk into a room and you have all of the services communicating. Well, now think about if you're inside that room and you're able to manage all of those services at a single AP. It's a great example, especially for hotel rooms. I mean, if you walk in these days, a lot of hotel rooms are so high tech. You're using your phone to now check in. And now if you're a frequent visitor, you walk in and it maybe remembers, oh, she likes it cold, so I'm going to turn down the temperature, and it's all connected off of BLE beacons. These are the kind of applications you can deliver with IoT, and we're taking these types of use cases out into the streets. So just a couple more applications that we're looking at that are more applicable for cities, right? So the ability to actually track and manage, well, I guess you can't manage the weather, but you can track and you can plan for it, right? Using data that you're collecting off of those APs. One that's probably not very applicable in the UK, but more so in the US, gunshot depiction. You guys are supposed to laugh at that. Gunshot depiction. So being able to actually pinpoint the exact location that a gunshot has gone off and deploy emergency services to that exact location. What an incredible opportunity to be proactive and to be able to mitigate some of that public safety problems. Flood management, I know you guys have a history of flooding, and I know that there's a solution in place, but you'd be surprised how many cities are still challenged with this. I'm not going to name any names, but one of my favorite stories, I was with a city that's nearby here. I said, Kia, it floods all the time here. And I asked them, well, how do you guys currently mitigate your flood problems? Well, when it's raining, we send Jim in his truck. He drives down to the river and he says, oh, it's flooding, and he makes a phone call, and then they put the big notifications up. It's unbelievable. Number one, that's very unsafe. I mean, what happens to Jim if he gets in an accident? So why not leverage IoT to have those types of sensors in place where you can actually track the level of the flooding and then also have that data so you can preventatively plan for the next year. Okay, we know March is a heavy rain season, so we're going to make sure that we have extra people on call and that ready to help us if something happens. So these are just some of those examples that you can use. And the great part about this is now we have a solution to be able to tie all of that onto the Wi-Fi network. So we're really excited to work with Sheffield. IDAC's done a really great job, and it's going to be exciting to see not only do we have public Wi-Fi available, but we can also look at other solutions that can be hosted on that network. So I'm going to breeze through this, so I promise I'll get the time back. So I already mentioned the hotel room. Great opportunity again. We are number one in hospitality, so we do work with a lot of the larger hotel chains, Marriott, Accor, and this is what people are into these days, right? We have IoT in our home, we want IoT when we're on the road, and now we're looking at some of these same types of management out on the street centers. Again, smart parking. I already talked about the lighting and the signage as well, so having the ability to have all of those assets connected and all of those services connected using the Wi-Fi. And this type of solution can be applicable to multiple smart ecosystems. So yes, when we talk about logistics and retail and the footfall and the asset tracking, imagine taking those same use cases out to the city centers. I mean, I'm not talking about getting into the privacy of what people are doing, but being able to actually have an educated account of how many people are visiting the city center. What time of day is it most populated? Do we need to have additional police force out because we know that there's a high visited area. I mean, these are the kinds of information and data that you can get when you're able to deploy these types of applications. That's it.
So we've got any questions? So if I understand this rightly, we're getting not just Wi-Fi in the city centre, but the capability of having additional communications protocols.
Correct.
On the same devices using the Wi-Fi as backhaul.
Yes, potentially. I mean, obviously we'll need to look at how that infrastructure is being used and what the use case is, but I mean, we've already been discussing some of those types of solutions that will bring a lot of value. I mean, there's no point of just having Wi-Fi. There's so much other additional benefits that we can explore, whether that's the data that's being collected, whether that's using your APs to actually host other sensors.
Yeah.
Air quality is a great example. That's something we could probably look at more immediately. I mean, it's endless. And the nice part about IoT is that once you have the right radio module, you can do whatever you want. And it's completely open, and any application can be hosted.
Have you hosted any of the Things Network LoRa protocols anywhere in your installations?
And
that's possible as well.
Yes, especially for parking solutions. I feel like that's a dirty word now. I'm not allowed to say it.
No, it's not a sign. It's part of the predictor.
But you'd be surprised. I mean, parking and traffic, these are top concerns for cities. No one wants to come to a city where they can never find a place to park. Did you guys hear about what happened in Wales? Over in Newport. I mean, they were fined because there was not enough parking places, that everyone was parked. Oh, that shouldn't be recorded. I don't like to say the names. But everyone was parked on the yellow lines. And this is something that's not only a safety hazard, but how can you actually maintain the agility of the city when everything's congested? So the government came through and said, you have to find a solution for this, whether that's an application or whether that's building new, car parks or park and ride applications, whatever that looks like. But this is very much a real scenario.
There was a report some years ago that 20% of the cars driving around Paris are looking for a parking spot. 20%.
Imagine if they had an application.
Looking for somebody to run over.
They're still probably driving. Anything else?
Well, following on from Chris's, you mentioned the radio modules. Are they inherent within every AP? So it's the sensors you can add, but are the radio modules for?
So they're going to be versatile. The product just got released. From the first phase, we're focused on BLE as well as Zigbee. Those seem to be the most prevalent in terms of the applications that our existing customer base is looking at. And then, of course, pulling in LoRa as well for the outdoor space.
The thing about BLE, though, it'll only go about 30 meters, won't it?
Yeah, but think about what you're trying to track. So if you're looking at that long range, you would use a LoRa. From a BLE perspective, especially when you're hosting on the Wi-Fi, you don't have the power capabilities. First of all, it's very low maintenance. And if you're doing something that's very controlled, especially like air quality management, you don't need a big, robust radio module. But it depends on the application. Again, there's so much versatility.
Well, we used to put beacons in oil refineries, and it's how if you're in a city, I suppose you've got to put one in every lamppost or something. But
It
the
depends.
distance it becomes problematic.
And if you think about if you want that granularity in data, though, you might want that close range proximity, especially, I mean, I talked very, very briefly, because I'm trying to eat back the time, about warehousing and logistics, asset tracking, things like that. You need that that's all right, I said hello. You need that to be very dedicated and specific to the area that you're tracking. So it depends, but the nice thing is that the AP has that flexibility.
Yeah.
Are these devices easily updatable? So
yes.
Looking at the examples that you gave there, the various different devices, it was almost like reading a list of the top 10 devices that get attacked and hacked, aren't they? And if you're talking about deploying those kind of things citywide, how do you make sure that you're not creating a botnet for somebody?
Yes, so just a real life example, and I'm not signing Mark up for anything, so just I'll explain the way that use case in my head would work. If you have a Wi-Fi infrastructure deployed in a city, and you want to have 3 different applications deployed, what you would do is set up separate VLANs for each of those applications. Because of course, we all know it's great to have Wi-Fi, but if you're not actually able to stream your Netflix, then what's the point? So you would have one that was for public access, and then you'd have one for whatever solution you want. Now within the actual protocol itself, there's several layers of security that have been developed. So you're not just protecting it at the data layer and the management layer where you're actually building that rule-based system, but actually at the physical asset. And what we didn't want to do, again, I talked about the silos in IoT. Why would we create something that pigeon-toed you into you can only do this? We wanted to have that flexibility where you can scale up, scale down. So today, you want to talk about air quality? Great, let's put sensors, let's test that. But if next year you want to look at something else, you have the ability to switch and change those radio modules out. And I think, for me, that's one of the best added values of being able to have that flexibility. And I know we've already discussed doing some POCs here in Sheffield. It's a great opportunity to look at what we can actually gather and what kind of data we can control. Anything else? Fabulous. Oh, yes, sir.
I think this kind of question applies to previous speakers, well, to Dan's kind of thing. It revolves around the accuracy of the data that we're actually collecting, the accuracy of the sensors, the accuracy and the authenticity of the data that's actually coming through. So, I mean, there's a parallel, you know, with the internet and social media, and now we've got what we call fake news, where there's so much, you know, information that's out there that people are grabbing, and there's not really an understanding of how much of it is accurate and how much of it's not. And so where does all that kind of fit with what you guys are trying to do?
So to be very clear, again, Ruckus is that glue. So yes, we support those applications, but what's actually those endpoints is not something that we would create. I actually think I would divert that question to someone who does more of an OS application that sits on top of that piping, again, using that plumbing example, because you guys are that aggregation point. So do you have?
Yeah, I mean,
comment?
it's a really good question, and data, you know, rubbish in, rubbish out. As you said, you know, some data is better quality than others. There's no magic wand necessarily for knowing how good quality a data is. So you start to get into having sophisticated data management tools that enable you to perhaps decide what confidence level you might afford for certain types of data or not. Your data that comes from a high quality sensor from a university might be afforded a higher confidence level than data that's streamed in from a citizen, you know, contributing data to a network. But 100 citizens contributing data that all align with each other, you know, maybe your confidence is higher. So I wouldn't say there's a silver bullet to that, but it's just about recognizing that that's an issue, and then making sure that you're appropriate in how different types of data are perhaps used and managed. There are sort of increasingly clever AI and ML tools. I mean, one of the things we do, although we don't generally get directly involved in the actual hardware of gathering data, we're more of the integration layer. We are getting involved with some sensors around air quality and water quality, and the ability to use a neural network that sits behind those sensors to actually better understand the context and to learn around the context of the sensors, we're finding is enabling us to get higher levels of confidence around the quality of the data. But yeah, I hope that's the...
I think the other thing as well there, though, is that when you start creating these networks and start adding the sensors in, immediately the data you're getting is better than the data that you had because there was nothing.
Yeah.
So you're starting from a point of having nothing, and you get something that might not be 100% accurate, but it's better than what you've got, and then the next generation's more accurate still, and so on.
Sometimes it's not until you start looking at the data you're gathering that you even realise there's a question. I mean, we had a building where we started ingesting data from an existing building management system, so we put nothing new in, we sucked in data from what's there. And there's air quality sensors in the building that are telling us the air quality is 78. And we said, what does that mean? Nobody knows. Nobody's calibrated or tested, or they don't even know what it's measuring. And so, you know, they paid for this stuff to go in, and nobody ever looked at it. So sometimes until you actually look and start asking the questions, you don't even know what the question is.
Well, I kind of understand where your point is. I mean, having some data is better than none. But I mean, I've dealt with the building next door where we had BMS, and we were measuring, you know, air quality, we were measuring temperature, and we were using it to control the BMS system, and at the same time trying to measure what the energy was doing when the lights were on, and where energy was actually being wasted. and I had PhD students involved in it, and we were getting this massive amount of data. So I mean, one sensor is producing 17,000 bits of information every month, you know. So you're just absolutely drowning in this data that's actually coming back, and you're trying to make some sense of it. So we kind of produced some algorithms that would actually help us to do that. But once we actually did it, we could actually then start, well, actually the data that's coming through is of itself corrupted by virtue of the fact that there were things that were happening with the BMS system, which meant it was going down for 2 hours at a time, then coming back and then pushing in a big slug of data that we thought was time-stamped to some other time. So we were having to then clean the information before we could actually get some meaningful. So if you times that by several 100,000 millions of times, that all these kind of, we're expecting all of these systems to work in the way in which we think they are going to work, but if they don't, then they actually produce more rubbish than they actually produce some useful data. So it's making sure that we have got the understanding of just how good, bad, or indifferent this data is. And I think your answer was a good answer insofar as that we do need to be able to qualify data and to give it, you know, this is absolutely secure, rock solid, and we can trust that. You know, whereas this stuff, likely to be dirty, it's useful, but it still might need some cleaning up, so treat it with kid gloves. So I mean,
yeah, this is where understanding the context of the data and everything that means around it is really important.
I think something to note here, though, and I'm going to end this on a very fluffy statement. That's what smart cities is, right? The beauty of all of these moving pieces coming together. You just gave a great example where a university was pulled in to analyze that data, right? Bristol is often referred to as the first smart city because they were the first joint venture between a council and a university. I mean, how often is that happening where you're bringing two entities together to look at what objectives do we have, how are we going to solve this, how are we going to manage the data? So I think there's a bit of onus, and it's not just on city councils and these public sector officials, it's also on the likes of technology vendors. We have to learn to work together and create these platforms that are interoperable and are able to scale and figure out how to solve these problems together, because that's what smart cities is. It's that collaboration of people, processes, data, technology. So it's you just have to stay open-minded as well.
Yeah, I think, sorry, just like to add, on the sensor side of things, there aren't any real quality standards that define whether you're buying a good or bad or different sensor. So you have to look at the sensor, as Dan's pointed out, in conjunction with what can technology do, because you can improve the quality of the sensor and the outputs of the sensor by virtue of using trained neural networks or whatever to improve them. But there's another aspect, and we actually looked at this in Sheffield a few weeks ago. Where you're putting sensors, you need to take a more strategic view of what you're doing. So at the moment, you've got, in pretty much any city, you've got air quality sensors. You've got cameras, but invariably they're not in the same place. So you might be having poor air quality, but you can't see why.
yeah.
And so you have to look at it in the whole. And that fits again into where are you putting your Wi-Fi network, where are you putting your sensors. Look at it top down across the city. What are the objectives you're trying to achieve? Because if you're trying to improve air quality, taking a measure is going to do nothing for you anyway. You need to see why air quality goes well. Usually on the 11th of January, there's a report saying that Oxford Circus has missed its 10 consecutive days of poor air quality. How much of that is to do with the transport there, and how much of that is to do with the way that the city is built, and the wind is blowing the poor air quality into somewhere? It may be nothing to do with transport. How do you know?
Yeah.
So
probably worth pointing out as well, Steve Jubb has left, but the Urban Flows Observatory at the Sheffield University is basically putting reference grade sensors in across the city. So if you want to know whether the sensors you've put in are true or not, are calibrated correctly, or whether you could save money by putting slightly cheaper sensors in to get something that's within the tolerances you've got. We've got a reference network being installed in Sheffield at the moment in parallel to the Wi-Fi network that's going into.
So I would just add a note to that. I'm actually working with Steve and Martin Mayfield on air quality inside buildings, which is an infinitely more complex problem than the one outside. I mean, we're sitting here in probably 200 or 300 different chemicals, and how to actually separate out which ones are
Thanks, Eddie.
good for you and which ones are bad for you. Probably not so bad. Well, I don't know. This is a new building, so I'm not hold count on that. But you know, the ability for us to understand and have the sensors that recognise what's inside and what's outside. And so the Urban Flows Observatory is the perfect platform because we're measuring not just in this area, we're measuring lots of different parameters, and so we can, using AI and neural networks, bring together and try and really improve the quality of sensors and what we can detect what should be there, and then using the sensors that we have, we can work out what probably is there in relation to what the neural networks and AI is actually telling us should be there. And so these sensors are all very small, they fit inside phones, so we can all be carrying around really accurate sensors, which comes back to that quality issue that we have when it comes to measuring air quality inside buildings. Because where I'm sitting here, it's completely different in terms of what I would actually detect to where you are over there.
It's much better than me.
Just worth saying, although they're not here tonight, BRE are sort of loosely part of this kind of project. They're very keen to be involved. They came to our launch event with Westfield Health and the council, and they're doing a lot in this space. In fact, they're probably going to start moving into the world of actually creating objective standards for sensors because they feel there's a real gap there.